So first we're going to learn about the rest operator. So the rest operator is essentially this symbol right here, an ellipsis, 3 dots put together. And although this operator is also the spread operator, when you see this operator in the function parameters, meaning if we have a function and we have listed parameters up here, that's when it's a rest operator. So rest operator when in function parameters. It is also sometimes known as a spread operator, which we'll talk about later in the video, but that's when we find it in a function invocation, like when a function is called, or an array. But we will be addressing that later. So what is the rest operator for? The rest operator is very, very useful for when you have a situation when your function takes an unknown amount of arguments, or maybe you want to group a certain amount of those arguments together. But the way that it's going to be invoked is not with one array, but like multiple values. So as a non-implementation of it, but an example to start with, we have a max function. So this max function takes an array of numbers. First thing we do is we check to see if the numbers array is empty. In the case, why are you trying to find the maximum amount of a array that has nothing in it? So we say return null. But otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's use reduce, array.reduce, off of everything except the first one. And the way that reduce works is that if we provide initial value, which we're going to make the first number in this array, it'll start as the current max. And then we're going to go through every number after the first one in this array and compare it to the current max. So you say if num is greater than the current max, then let's return num, make that the current max for the next iteration. Otherwise, we return the current max that was already there. So we can see that this works. Let's do a console log. We're going to say max, and then provide an array, 5, 4, 6, 7, 9, and 14. So this should definitely give us 14, and we'll make sure that we put this maybe somewhere in the middle just to make sure that this is going to work rather than just returning the last number. So we run this rest.js, we get 14. We can get rid of all the numbers except the 5, and we run this and we get 5. Obviously that's the max, so it still works. And then if we run it with a empty array, we get back null. So there's no max because you didn't give me anything to work with. Okay, what do we do if we want to actually mimic how mathmax works? So mathmax, which is a built-in function with JavaScript, doesn't take an array. In fact, you just give it a bunch of separate number arguments and it will find the max within those. So what can we do? As far as we know, based on ES6, we use the arguments keyword. So if we were to change it over to this should give us a maximum of 7, or yeah, 7. This is not going to work. We're going to get, in this case, null, because we're going to try to find the length of 5, which is falsy, so it returns null. This is obviously broken right now. So how would we fix an ES6? We get rid of the parameter, and we say that nums is equal to this weird hack, array slice call arguments, right? Just put all the arguments that this is being called with into an array called nums, and then we can start our normal functionality from there. So we say node rest.js, and we get 7, which is what we expect to get. The rest operator from ES6 essentially allows for us to receive the rest of the parameters and put it in an array. So we can remove this completely and then say dot, 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 nums, or dot, 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 ARR, or dot, 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 numbers, whatever we want to call it. In this case, the rest of my functions are already using nums. So what this will do is it will take all of the arguments that are that max is being invoked with for any given invocation and put all of those values into an array and call it nums. So we can do this, and it works like we expect it to. Change this to an 8 just to see that this is being changed, and you can see that it's an 8. Something interesting that I'm doing in this reduce is I'm taking the first nums off of the array, making it the initial value for the reduce, and then starting past the first value in order to actually run the reduction. But what I could do is I could say first num and then ... nums. So this is something you can do with the rest operator as well, where you're saying I'm going to receive the first argument, which in this case is 5, and call it first num, but then the rest of the arguments here are going to get called nums because of my rest operator. So now if we were to console log, let's actually inspect what's going on here a little bit. We say console log first num and nums, so we can say first here, and we'll see the nums right after. You can see it says first 5, and then the rest of the nums are 6, 7, 8, 6, 0. And what this allows us to do is we can now say, make the initial value of our reduction, the first num, and then just the nums reduced from there, because it's already sort of like we sliced it out. And we end up with the same thing, and if the first value is the max, that will still work, etc., etc. So let's look at the other use case for this ellipsis operator, which is called spread. Spread is the other side of this story. Rest is when we're receiving parameters. Spread is used when we are giving parameters or giving arguments to a function. So let's take this, for example, mathmax. As I mentioned earlier in the video, mathmax does not take an array. You can't say 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, whatever, whatever. You have to provide separate arguments. You have to say 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 etc., etc. So what happens in the case where you have, maybe from somewhere else in your program or hard-coded like I'm about to do it here, you have nums and you have a bunch of numbers and you want to figure out what's the max in this set, right? How do you work with mathmax? You can't just say nums here. Let's see what happens when we try this. We're going to say console log mathmax nums. Let's see what happens when we say node spread. We get nan, which is not a number, because we're providing an array, and mathmax wants some numbers. So we say that instead, and you can see that we get 4. So how do we solve this problem with ES5? Well, we use apply. Right? Apply allows for us to provide a context, which for mathmax doesn't really matter because it doesn't use the this keyword. And then we can provide an array as the second argument to apply, in this case nums. And what this is going to do is it's going to take each element in this array and make it a separate argument to the invocation of mathmax. So we essentially have mathmax being invoked with 1, comma, 2, comma, 3, as if they were separate arguments. And this ends up working. So we end up getting 10 as our max. So what we can use the spread operator for in ES6 is we can essentially, whenever we don't have to supply context, we can replace apply completely. So what we can do, I'm just going to separate this out so the parentheses don't get too confusing. What we can do is, instead of doing this, which I'll comment out so you can reference it, we can do this instead. We can say ... nums. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the contents of the nums array and spread them out as multiple arguments. Sort of like taking the array and smashing it and all the pieces sort of neatly unattached from each other and then become arguments for the function that you want to call. So we can end up doing this, and we can see that it says 10 like we did before. This can also be combined in a number of ways. What we can do is we can say, all right, let's do 11 and then nums, for example. And now it'll still work, and our max will be 11. We can make this 1, and our max will be 10. So it takes the first argument, 1 first, and then takes all the contents of the nums array, spreads those as multiple arguments, and then we can say 18 afterwards, right? And then we can take another array, maybe also nums, and we say that this has 13 and 21. And we can say spread out also nums. So now what we have as our argument list is 1, and then all of these as separate arguments, and then 18, and then 13, then 21. We can, try this out in one of our own functions. Let's just do this. var max is equal to a function, and we're just going to console log arguments here. Or we could say an array with our rest operator, but let's just look at the arguments keyword, and we're just going to call max here just to see what this looks like. And you can see 0 is 1, and then we have another 1 from here, and then we have all of those going all the way down until we get to 18, which happens after the 2. So you can see that the spread operator operates on an array and chunks it out, makes it separate arguments for the invocation of a function. But that's not its only use case. Another use case for the spread operator, which once again is this ellipsis, but not used in invoking or receiving parameters for a function actually, is when it's used in arrays. So the spread operator used in arrays. It's pretty interesting. So let's say that we have two arrays. We have array of nums, which is here, 1, 5, and 3, and 6, and 8. And we have another array of nums, so also nums, and we have 7, and 3, and 8, and 9, and 10, and whatever else. If we wanted to combine these two arrays into one array that has 1, 5, 3, 6, 8, 7, 3, 8, 9, 10, we have a whole bunch of different ways of doing it. I mean, the I think most uninformed way to do it would be if we were to do like also nums, I is equal to also nums length, and then I plus plus. We can just go through every also nums I and push it into nums, and then we can say console log nums, and then run this. Node rest in arrays, spread in arrays, spread in arrays, and we have a combined array here of nums and also nums. Problems with this is, one, for loops in general for iterating over nums isn't ideal. We could do this with a for each as well. We can say also nums for each, and then we get each of these nums here, and then we can say nums push n, and we end up with the same thing. We comment this out. Still works. Another problem that the for loop also had is that we are mutating nums itself. So we are adding things onto nums using push. So now nums, as it originally was, is no longer its original form, but always a combination of itself and also nums, so to speak, which is not great. So we could maybe like copy it first. There's a whole bunch of ways we could accomplish this. I think the way that I like the most without using ES6 is doing this. We can say const new nums is equal to nums concat also nums. And what concat does is it will not mutate nums or change also nums, but it will give you a new array of those things combined. So we can say new nums here. Get rid of this, or we can just comment it out. And we get the combination once again. Interesting to keep in mind is that if we were to look at nums and also nums, we have their original values, right? So this is the combination new nums, but the nums and also nums stay intact to what they were, despite the fact that they were merged and created a new array out of that merge. So this process of concatenating an array to an array can actually be done using the spread operator. So the idea of using the spread operator when you invoke a function like we did before, where we said math max and then we said dot 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 nums, or we can also nums, is the fact that we can take this array and like smash it, and it will break apart in even chunks and then become arguments here. The same thing happens when you use the spread operator inside of an array literal. So what we can do to essentially mimic new nums is we can say const new nums is equal, and we say array literal here, so empty, and then, all right, let's smash nums and break it apart into separate values. And in this case, we're not invoking a function, so those separate values smash and then fall into essentially separate elements for this array. And then what we can do is put a comma after here and then smash or spread also nums. So what we end up with, I'm going to comment this out, is the same effect of these two arrays being merged together because we smash this, and put them in this new array, which is pretty cool because now we can like maybe also add a couple numbers in between and trailing as well. So we can just do this and 0 here. So we got that. And then we can do something like really wild, like mix the spread operator for being used in arrays along with it being used for function invocation. So we can say, let's console log math max, and then we can say, here's an array, and we're going to smash nums inside of that array, and we're going to smash also nums inside of that array. So now we have an array of all the nums and then all the also nums into one array, but that's not what mathmax takes, right? Mathmax takes separate arguments, so we can say, okay, now smash that array. And now it'll take all of that and spread it out, and we end up getting 10, which should be the max here. Yes, that is the highest number in all of these arrays. Let's just put a 21 in here just to verify that everything is working as we expect it to, and it's 21. Now, the reason I do this kind of thing is, one, because it's sort of cool. It's definitely like clever and interesting, but I wouldn't call it good programming. Just something to keep in mind is that the combination of these operators can get really, really unwieldy very, very quick. So while this is cool and it definitely can be useful in like small doses, it does have the effect of being maybe a little too hard to understand compared to other things, to other people and to yourself in the future. You always have to be thinking about your program and your code being written as simply as possible so that you can understand it. I definitely think that this nums concat also nums, because of the original spread operator, this makes a little bit more sense to me, where I'm concatenating and merging these things together, and now there's just one spread. Whereas if I have this, I'm looking at 3 different spread operators, and I have to notice these brackets. And although I think this is simple enough looking at line 19 specifically, if you scale up with how many spreads you're doing and how many arrays you're merging and other complication as opposed to the simple example, it can get very, very hard to keep track of. So I wouldn't abuse this feature, but it can work, and it's very, very interesting. And that's rest and spread. There's a couple other things with properties and objects that aren't necessarily part of ES6, but are part of ES7 that you will encounter if you go ahead and Google it. But this is enough to know for now. Thanks for watching.